How is it that I can fake start the podcast 5 times and love all of the intros, and then when I actually sit down and record it, I do not like any of the intros? Welcome back to the second episode of Full Disclosure with Christian Thayer. You guessed it, I am your host, Christian Thayer. So the good news is, people, is that we did not get canceled after episode 1. So that must mean that A, I didn't push the envelope hard enough, or we have something good here. So we're just going to figure it out. We're going to keep rolling. We're going to keep producing bi-weekly episodes. A little programming note is that, you know how if you did listen to my first episode, and if you haven't, go and listen to it. But in that episode, I did briefly touch on the fact that, as this podcast progresses, I would love to interview you, the listener. And so with that programming note in mind, I do have an interview lined up. We don't have anything set in stone yet, but in my head, I'm thinking more or less like the 4th or 5th episode. I'm not going to tell you who it is, but if you are interested at all in being interviewed by possibly the greatest podcaster to ever start a podcast, feel free to reach out, Slide in, don't slide into my DMs. Maybe you could actually. Instagram, that's just Christian_Thayer. That might be an easy way to do that. Or if you're seeing this video on Facebook, just drop a comment. As far as this video is concerned, so last video was pretty much a solo topic, right? And as I continue to do this podcast, we are going to, we're going to figure out what the heck this podcast is, how it's going to flow, what it's going to look like. And for the second episode, I do have, I don't want to say timely topics, but they're sort of timely topics, which isn't necessarily the goal for this podcast. I do want them to be sort of evergreen content, so you can listen to them in like 3 months and they'll still be relevant. But I thought that these two topics were a little bit too important to pass up. First one being, if you are familiar at all with what is going to happen at the end of this month, barring any government interference, is that on July 31st, the eviction ban is expiring. So for those of you that are unaware, because of COVID and all of that unfortunate stuff, basically the government came out and pretty much said, hey, landlords, you can't evict your renters for not paying rent. And subsequently, government has been helping those renters in need pay rent. And we're going to, get into that way more in detail. But that whole topic is basically how that rule of the landlords not being able to evict their renters expires on July 31st. So that means that August 1st, again, barring any government interference, we could see a lot of people getting evicted, and I think we should talk about that and what that means for not only the economy, because that's really not what this podcast is about, but more so the real estate market, right? Are we going to see a flood of properties on, maybe come on sale because the landlords don't want to rent anymore, blah, blah, blah. And then to cap off the episode, we're just going to briefly touch on the Delta COVID variant, because that's, as much as I don't want to talk about it, and nor am I going to be taking a stance on is it real, that's not the point. Point is that it's in the news, and it is affecting things such as the stock market. And should it continue, we could see it affect our day-to-day lives like we did the actual COVID strain. So we're just going to touch on that, and away we go. All right, just to give you guys some quick stats and facts about the renting landscape and what's been going on. According to government data, around 176,000 renter households have received federal aid since the start of June. Also, apparently, around 11.5 million renters are possibly still behind on payments. Now, obviously, that could be a multitude of factors, but the government has apparently been snail pacing their rollout of the relief, which could have disastrous consequences. So, as I had mentioned earlier, the national ban on evictions is scheduled to be lifted at the end of this month, July 31st. So depending on when you're watching this or listening to this, July 31st is the key date. However, only a sliver of the $45 billion in assistance that was allocated by Congress has gone out to renters who are behind on their housing payments. So again, as I mentioned, Congress basically came out and be like, hey, we're going to help people, pay their rent, because if they're affected by COVID, that's garbage. So we're going to help you out. Here's $45 billion. However, the only slight issue with that is the fact that the government didn't really, this is a new thing. So they basically just like, hey, all you states and cities and towns, you're going to have to figure out how to disperse this. So obviously that is leading to a snail-paced effort. The first round of rental aid was authorized by Congress in December, and by February, the U.S. Department of the Treasury had distributed the full $25 billion to the states. In March, Congress allocated another $21 billion in aid for renters and their landlords, and states have so far received around $8.6 billion of that money, meaning there is more than half of that second installment of that $21 billion that has yet to be dispersed out to people that actually need it. And the snail-paced distribution of relief could have disastrous consequences, with the national ban on evictions set to expire in around 2 weeks. Like I said, 11.5 million or thereabout people in the U.S., or 16% of adult renters, are not current on their housing payments, according to the most recent analysis by the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. Okay, so let's cut to August 1st. Now, I'm not a fortune teller. You're not a fortune teller. Well, maybe you're a fortune teller. But that's, again, another episode. Let's say it's August 1st. The government has not stepped in and prolonged the non-eviction period, or they've somehow figured out how to give away the remaining like 13 or $12.4 billion. Okay, it's August 1st, and landlords can now legally evict their tenants. Allegedly 11.5 million or thereabout adult renters are behind on their payments. So let's just say roughly, I'm just going to play, hypothetical game here, 6 to 7 million of those people actually get evicted. Their landlords come in, they're like, all right, well, I haven't been getting paid, so therefore you're out. So what does this mean? I'm sort of asking that question. I don't really know if I have an answer for that. I'm simply posing the question of what happens? What happens when 6 to 7, or you name it, millions amount of people are just like, okay, yep, you can no longer live at your current residence because you can't make any money. What is it going to mean for the housing market, right? So 6 to 7 million, so houses, I don't know if that's exactly how many houses are going to come unavailable, but let's just say August 1st, or just in August, we start seeing a flood of houses come on to the housing scene. Now, some of those could still be for rent. Some of those might be put up for sale because the landlords are just done renting and they just don't want to deal with it anymore. Basically, the point that I'm maybe trying to bring up is if we see a flood of properties on the market, is that going to lower and dilute the prices, the housing prices in which they currently are? Because, I don't know if you've been living under a rock recently, but the housing prices have been what some would say inflated. They would also say that there is not a lot of inventory. Now, I don't think we are where we were in the spring and early summer with the fact that there was maybe 2 houses on the market in the whole nation. So no, I don't think we are where we were. It has slowed down a little bit. There is a little bit more inventory. Prices are maybe coming down a smidge. But if all of a sudden we get an influx of houses, not only for rent, but also for sale, what is that going to do? Is that going to crash the housing market? I don't think so. I really don't. Maybe that's a good thing though, because maybe you have, who knows, let's spin this into a good thing. Well, for you, I guess. Maybe you have tons of buyers that are just sitting around and waiting because they can't find a house. So, maybe you should be preparing for August to be extremely busy. And if it's not, well, you can't win them all. So I guess keep that in mind, and also just keep your eyes out for, if this gets extended, because you never know. But in theory, it does have to end sometime. So why not August 1st, right? So that's kind of what I wanted to touch on with that topic. So keep your eyes out for August. You might start seeing a influx of houses on the market, not only for rent but also for sale. So maybe if you have buyers lined up but they can't find anything, maybe hey, just let them know August might be good. But obviously there's no guarantees. And next up, love it or hate it, we still have COVID around. And more specifically, this is the Delta variant, which we may or may not have heard of. Love it or hate it, we are still in the COVID area. What am I trying to say? We are still era. There we go. Love it or hate it, we are still in the COVID era. And more specifically, at the moment, we are now in the Delta variant COVID era. So if you are unaware of what the Delta variant is, it's a variant of COVID, much like flu and the cold and all of that other fun stuff. Every year a different quote unquote strain comes out. And it affects you. That's how you're able to keep getting sick if you get flu shots, which again, we don't need to talk about. So in this aspect, the Delta variant is still COVID, but it's a different variant. And according to the CDC director, the Delta variant now accounts for 83% of all sequenced COVID cases in the US. And that is a dramatic increase, up from 50% the week of July 3rd. The Delta variant, which has been spreading rapidly across the world for months, finally caught the attention on Monday, sparking fears for economic growth. The stock market, the Dow, suffered its worst day since October, and the S&P and NASDAQ recorded their worst day since May. So, basically, the whole point of bringing this up is the fact that it seems that getting back to normal, pre-COVID era, might be a little delayed. For example, Apple has reportedly pushed back their return to office until at least October. And I believe before that, it was pretty much set to, I think, come back either in July or beginning of August. So they've pushed it back. But basically, the whole point of bringing this up is that if, for whatever reason, this new strain decides to take over the world again and shut it down, or maybe not shut it down completely, but at least, hinder us from getting back to normal, maybe, pushing us a couple steps back, that is going to affect you as a real estate agent, because that's going to affect the housing market. So hopefully you learned something the first time around about, how to maybe market yourself. Maybe if you have a little bit of downtime, barring any major setbacks or our governor in Michigan doing anything too drastic. Pretty much what I'm trying to say here is that make sure if that happens that you are hopefully prepared to handle it, so that you can, maybe focus more on your social media game. You can do other sorts of marketing things so that you don't get left behind. Obviously, I'm going to tell you to do video because by 2022, all consumer internet traffic will be consumed by video. And last time I checked, 2022 is less than 6 months away. By the time you're hearing this, it could be 5 months away. Maybe make some videos. That's not the worst idea, because depending on where you live, I live in Michigan, pretty much since, beginning of July. I don't really remember when the exact date was when the mask mandate came off. But if you've been, out and about, it's, for the most part, it feels like everything's back to normal. You really don't see masks anymore. And if you do, you don't even notice them. So it feels like everything's gone back to normal. I don't really think anything that I've been doing in my day-to-day life has been stifled in the past month or so. So if this variant continues to, wreak havoc on, everything, then just be aware that, you might wake up one morning and you could see the governor on TV saying hey, we need to go back to masks or whatever. We need to close some stuff down. So just be aware, keep that in your back mind of like, okay, here's my game plan for if stuff sort of takes a couple steps back is pretty much all I'm trying to say here. All right, that should be the end of this episode. Hopefully you enjoyed it, made it all the way here. If you are still listening, thank you. That's great. And again, if you want to be interviewed on this podcast, feel free to slide into my Instagram DMs. It would be Christian_Thayer. Or if you see this video on Facebook or anywhere else, you can just leave a comment and we can get in touch. All right, until next episode.